Does Session Zero need to change in 2025? You know what? I think it might. Let's dive in and talk about it. Game Masters, we need to talk about Session Zero in 2025. A lot of Game Masters have been running Session Zero the same way for a long time. In fact, I have been guilty of running Session Zero the same way for a very long time. Up until my more recent Barren Lands campaign, which episode 3 just aired last night, I generally navigated Session Zero with kind of a long and complicated list of questions. Things like, who is your character? Tell me about their background. What are their motivations? What are their bonds and ideals? And go super in depth with all of this so that I can learn as much as possible about your characters. Now, while I do not necessarily disagree with this approach, and while it can be actually a very useful approach, I have found that Session Zero has changed for me in a big way, in a more successful way. And I want to describe exactly what I mean by that. I believe that in 2025, game mastering and running D&D is changing. I think that people are looking for a more personalized experience. I think that players are looking for more connection and less homework. Don't get me wrong, there are some players out there who love to do that in-depth stuff. But I will also admit that I think that that's a bit on the decline right now. I think that as we launch more games in the virtual space, which seems to be the way that a lot of things are going right now, we end up with situations where there just isn't as much human connection. And this leads me to a very simple conclusion. I believe, and hear me out, you might drop some hate from me in the comments on this. You might think to yourself, you know what, GM Philosopher has truly lost his mind on this one. But I'm going to say it. I think that as Game Masters, maybe we have overcomplicated Session Zero. I think that this whole situation calls for a simpler concept involving Session Zero. And here is honestly the approach that I've started taking that I think works better. At Session Zero, instead of launching into a really complicated list of questions about every minute detail about a character, their backstory, their personality, their alignment, etc., I really have one big question. Tell me about your character. Tell me who they are. And then I just want to listen. Now, some players don't flesh out their characters very much. They may stammer and not know how to answer this question, while in-depth players will probably talk to you for literally 30 minutes about their character. Right here, I want to give you a tip that has made my life so much easier. Record these conversations. Record them on your phone. If it's happening virtually, you can probably record it very easily. But find a way to record these conversations because this is actually pure gold. Now, what do you do if a player character or a player actually kind of stammers and hems and haws and doesn't really know how to answer the question, tell me about your character. Who is your character? Well, the reason a player would have trouble describing this is if they haven't thought very deeply about their character. Maybe they give you like a 1 or 2 sentence description of their background or where they came from. This is a great start. And here's where I like to help the player. Instead of giving them an in-depth questionnaire about their character, I like to just ask some simple follow-up questions. And you can even use a list to help you inform these questions. But conversationally walking through who this character is, why they've come to be here, what they believe about the world, what their experiences have led them to believe and be as a person. These are really interesting questions, and I believe that they're better had in a conversational format than over like a homework format. Simply said, I believe that in 2025, Session Zero is changing. I think it's turning more into a conversation between the game master and the player than some kind of like detailed assignment. Speaking of detailed assignment, does it ever feel like a detailed assignment trying to keep your players moving in the same direction? If your players are anything like mine, they do all kinds of wild stuff all the time and change your plans, and basically all your preparation gets thrown out the window. Well, that's why I created this ebook. It's called The GM Philosopher's Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It contains 4 D100 tables that lets you random roll plot arcs on the fly. Rule on the hook table, the complication table, the climax table, and even on the wild and wacky table to throw stuff at your players they would have never seen coming. I give this ebook away for free to anyone who signs up for my email list. Link is in the description. Sign up, you'll get an email within 15 minutes with a download link. Boom, print it out, put it with your stuff, and never go without a plot arc ever again. I give this away for free just because, well, I love plot arcs and I love random tables. So, shabam! Now let's get back to the video. Now, once again, I have to stress, there are going to be players at your table who are probably going to do the homework assignment anyway, because they're very detail-oriented and they love to get deep with their characters. But there are some players who just do not fit into that mold. And so for these situations, I think that the conversational approach is really good. I also think the conversational approach is really good when you're talking to the detailed players too, because once you get them rolling and talking, they may talk to you for 30 minutes. And if you're recording that conversation and then you can compile those notes later, you're going to have so much information about that character that honestly, that person wouldn't have written down, quite possibly, because writing is just so much slower than talking. There is actually a mechanical advantage to talking through session zero as opposed to like writing it down or something like that. Now, for those of you who already talk through session zero, you may be saying to yourself, GM Philosopher, you're very out of touch. I've been doing this since 1981. You're not telling me anything new. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe the way we used to run session zero back in the old days before we had all the virtual stuff and before it got more complicated, well, maybe that was the right way to do it. Back then, we were also running more theater of the mind type stuff. There was a lot more of that back then. It wasn't so technical, at least not in my experience. When I gamed back in the day, so to speak, it was not nearly as technical. I didn't pull out a map and start using it until I had already been gaming for literally years. And the only reason I ended up pulling on a map was not because other game masters were doing it or because I heard about it on YouTube. It was just because the combats were getting so complicated and my player characters were developing abilities that were so specific in like terms of distance and range and that kind of thing, that it became kind of just too difficult to track everything in the mind. I interrupt this program real quick to say that I hope you're enjoying the content. And if you are, if you'd hit that thumbs up button and smash that subscribe button, it would mean the world to me. Also, I have a Discord. There are over 400 game masters in there right now. If you love to talk about D&D, find the link in the description. Join us. We'd love to have you. All right, now back to the video. Now, this is fine. I have no problem with making a hex grid and putting the pieces down there. And I actually like playing on virtual because it offers an even deeper experience into this technical type combat. But what I'm saying is, it didn't used to be so technical. It was a lot more conversational back in the early days of D&D. I really believe it was. Now, I didn't come into D&D until 3rd edition. There were 2 full editions before I even got into the game. With that being said, even I will admit that session 0 was a lot more about just filling out your character sheet and then talking about your character excitedly in anticipation for the first session. This was really what we did. And even though we didn't have long lists of detailed questions to ask each other about our characters, the truth is those characters came out super deep, and they came out deep in the trenches of role play. When we actually jumped into the game and started role playing, development just started to take place. We were excited to play and we were pumped to play. And I believe that the conversational approach to session 0 helped in this by making it so accessible. I literally had players who had never seen a D&D character sheet in their whole lives, and yet they were very excited to play. I would sometimes literally fill out their character sheet for them and tell them what their abilities were. And then when it came to character backstory, they would maybe give me 3-4 sentences at max. And then I would just talk with them about their character, and they would come up with ideas for things like personality and how they would display their alignment and the kinds of things they cared about and the quirks they would have. These things would come out in conversation, but even more so, they would come out as the game was played and as the storyline emerged and the characters began to develop themselves and their personalities really came out. Speaking of coming out, nothing will bring your players out of their shell like going into a village and doing some shopping. And what do you need before you go shopping in D&D? Well, you need some shops. That's why me and the amazing creators at GM Philosophy Community Publishing put together this gem of an ebook. Introducing 50 mundane TTRPG shops, it is exactly what it sounds like, an expansive compendium of shops, purveyors, goods, services, prices, and more. Take a look at all of the shops in here: the Whiskered Haven, Arwen Fletcher's shop, the Gallopers, Grove Stables and Livery, and so much more. And each shop is fully fleshed out. Take a look at this. Scorch Scale Suites. There's a brief description, brief history of the establishment, brief lore, outside view GM description, inside view GM description, so you can read them to your players, the owner, purveyor name, description, and motivations, other employees, services and wares, prices, potential plot arc ideas, and more. This ebook retails for just $4.99 on my personal bookstore, 164 pages of awesome shops and details, prices, etc. Or you can get it for free by signing up for my Ko-Fi. There are 4 different tiers in the Ko-Fi, different levels of support, but even the lowest level, the Iron level, comes with full access to my ebook store. Plus, higher tiers get you even that much more value. You can find links to both of these things down in the description. I would encourage you to jump through, take a look, and maybe grab either the ebook or a Ko-Fi membership. It helps to support the channel, the small creators who make it happen, the Discord and the YouTube and everything else. Plus, you'll get some awesome resources that I literally use every time I play D&D. All right. Now back to the video. But this leads to another question. Why doesn't this happen more nowadays? I'm going to tell you why. I believe that the reason I'm making some of these observations is because I was gaming with people who were really in-depth role players, honestly, and they were really excited to play the game. And when we played D&D, there was literally no such thing as someone like scrolling on the phone or not paying attention. Everyone was deeply engaged in the game. Or they were maybe taking shots when it wasn't their turn. But that's a whole different conversation. I do believe that this has also changed. And I don't think that it's probably changed in the sense that nowadays people aren't as into it. I think that it has changed in the sense that maybe there are more people who are more distractible. I also think I was just very lucky to find a group to begin my D&D journey with who were super invested. With that being said, my group in the Barren Lands right now is super invested. We are playing very in-depth roleplay and it's over virtual. Our session 0 was relatively conversational. We didn't do a whole lot of like homeworky type stuff. We did do a series of interviews, which you can find a link to here, which were really awesome. We basically did these interviews after the second session because we were going to miss a session. So we did the interviews instead. And this has led me to another idea about session 0. I don't think session 0 is one conversation. I think that every so many sessions or so many levels, you should sit down with your players again and ask them again, tell me who your character is. Now, you told me who they were, 5 sessions ago, but who are they now? How have they changed? This question will really revolutionize the way that you interact with the player characters because the truth is these player characters are not the same that they were 5 sessions ago. They shouldn't be. And if your players are really in-depth role players, they're not going to be. They're probably going to change and evolve. And this is awesome. But you're not really going to know this as in-depthly if you don't have that conversation with your player characters. So long story short, nowadays in 2025, I believe that the new way to do session 0 is to make it very conversational. I think you should record those conversations. And I think that you should have those conversations periodically throughout the game instead of just at the beginning. Now, there are other things to talk about at session 0. There are things like, what are you not going to deal with in game? What are the off limits things? What are like the red line topics? Is there going to be player versus player stuff? All of that can also be discussed. And you can have a great list of things to discuss in that way. All I'm saying is that when it comes to character development at session 0, I think a conversational approach works better. And boom, I want to give a huge shout out to our Ko-Fi members, especially our first gold level supporter, Craig. Thank you so much, Craig, for supporting the channel. Thank you so much to our other Ko-Fi members for supporting the channel. You are also appreciated, and I appreciate you so much. With that being said, this is going to be a wrap. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D, and I will see you awesome people on the next one.